Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for one more possibility for us to present the package that we have just recently proposed, because we think it's a very important piece of legislation. And thanks also for saving me to having to explain my first slide, because of course I don't have to emphasize how important energy infrastructure is, because you have already thankfully done it for me. But what is also important is to see how much investment we will need in energy infrastructure in the coming decade. We have done some own analysis and used also existing studies and came to the result that about 140 billion euros will be needed to refurbish and to modernize and to expand our electricity networks, and about 70 billion euros will be needed to do the same for the gas networks. This is a huge investment, and it's even bigger if we compare it to what has been invested in the past decade, because then we see an acceleration by 50% for electricity and by 30% for gas grids. So it is going to be a major challenge to get that all delivered, taking especially into account the hurdles that there are today in front of energy network investments, such as you have already mentioned, the biggest hurdle currently is permit granting and public opposition. The second hurdle are regulatory measures, because as most of energy infrastructure, so especially transmission infrastructure, is regulated infrastructure, it is quite close that it's the regulatory conditions that have to be perfect in the first place so that the market can act within this regulatory framework. And then looking at the sheer amount of the investment that will be needed, of course, there will be some financial problems encountered as well. So in order to cope with those challenges, the Commission has come forward with a package of legislative proposals. We love packages, we always do packages, so this time we also did a package. And so to say, the centerpiece of that package is the Connecting Europe facility, and that is the piece of legislation that most people tend to remember, first of all probably because it has the most appealing name, Connecting Europe facility. But I would like to convince you this time that also the guidelines on energy infrastructure, so the sectoral guidelines, especially for energy, are just as important as the Connecting Europe facility. So in this package, therefore, there are the guidelines on trans-European energy infrastructure, on transport infrastructure, and broadband and digital infrastructure. There is another piece of legislation accompanying the package, which is the project bond pilots, on which maybe we can come back in a later stage. And there you see the figures in the Connecting Europe facility. About 9 billion euros have been proposed to help the implementation of the energy infrastructure priorities. So what is basically the objective of the guidelines? The objective is to implement the 12 priority corridors and areas that are necessary to meet Europe's 2020 goals, so energy policy and climate policy targets, by providing regulatory certainty and also an appropriate framework to promote these necessary investments. So which are those 12 priority corridors and areas? In the field. Okay, that's weird because we don't have the names, so I will have to list them to you somehow. Maybe ICT has tricked us. So the electricity corridors are the Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan. As you see, maybe I can try the pointer. This part, with the involvement of about 10 member states. We have the North-South interconnections in Central and Eastern Europe, North-South interconnections in Western Europe, and the Northern Seas offshore grids to get an integrated network in the Northern Seas. Then we do have two, so to say, horizontal priorities, the priority areas, which are the smart grids that cover all EU 27, and the, so to say, longer-term objective of electricity highways. Then, in the field of gas, the priorities are very similar. We also have the BEMIP there, the North-South interconnections in Central and Eastern Europe, North-South interconnections in Western Europe, and the famous Southern Corridor that I imagine most of you have heard of. And on that slide, I also represented one very specific priority, and that is the oil priority. We do have one geographical oil priority. It is to ensure security of supply and reduce environmental risks in those areas that are more vulnerable to supply shocks, because they're landlocked refineries. So that is a very specific priority area that I wouldn't really come back during the rest of my presentation. And then the last area is, or sector, so to say, is CO2 transport networks, and that's also whole EU's 27 coverage. One point I have to make is that in the regulation, we do cover transport, but we do not cover transport, storage, LNG for gas, but we do not cover generation of electricity nor production of gas. So, so to say, the first revolution we made was to move away from the old 10E approach. So we did not want to fix a long list of projects of common interest as it is done currently under the Trans-European Energy Network guidelines, the old 10E decision, so to say, because we found that that approach was very rigid and also very problematic in the sense that there was no possibility to update, there was no possibility to focus. You just had a very long list of 550 projects in an annex, and that was basically it. So without any possibility to make it workable. So what we wanted to do is move away from this approach and to adopt a more dynamic approach as to how to identify projects of common interest. And I'm not going to go into the details, but the important things are that we would like to have, first of all actors involved. So member states, the Commission, TSOs and project promoters, and the regulators from whom we retain that it's very important that they realize the supranational benefits of projects at an early stage, and that this approach should be based on objective criteria, which I'm going to come to on my next slide. So what we would like to move towards is this dynamic approach repeated every 2 years to help to update the list of projects of common interest.